What's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the FF Ballbusters podcast. My name is Will. Joining me is my co-host Eric, and today we are talking notable free agents and just all of the different free agent signings that have happened so far. The new league year is about to start soon, so we got a lot to talk about. But before we get into that, Eric, you got anything for the people?
Yeah, man, just big shout out to you guys, our audience. Thank you so much for the support that we've gotten as of late. Things are kind of slowing down right now during the off season. We're hoping that things pick back up soon, but we still have been getting plenty of engagement from you guys, and we want to keep that momentum going. So if you guys continue to enjoy the content, let us know by leaving a like on the video, hitting that subscribe button, and also hitting that notification bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest releases. And also leave a comment, talk to us, let us know what you think about the upcoming free agency class. We'd love to know your thoughts. But I think that's all I got. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a look over here at NFL.com, and let's actually start where the latest signings have actually happened so far.
I like it.
Just so we can talk about people who are already off the board. Taking a look, we're just going to scroll through. We're starting with the AFC East. Mitchell Trubisky has landed back at the Buffalo Bills. The Steelers experiment did not work out, so he's going back to the Bills, where I think he kind of had some of his best time there. We didn't really see a whole lot of him, so that was probably really good for a lot of people right there.
But agreed. People, in theory, thought that he had his best time there. So yeah, I'm with you.
Taking a look down, we're gonna stick to the fantasy relevant guys. Nelson Aguilar signed a 1-year extension with the Baltimore Ravens, so he's gonna be back with the team. Another big one right here. T. Higgins signed a non-exclusive franchise tag, or received a non-exclusive franchise tag. He's yet to sign it, but that's going to pay him around $21.8 million. He's going to return with the Bengals. I think they're still hoping to possibly work out something long term, but at the very least, this is going to get him back with the team and keep that wide receiver core together for Joe Burrow.
One more year.
Yeah, for at least one more year. But Tyler Boyd may not be here with the team going forward. We don't really know. We're keeping an eye on that situation.
That sounds like the most likely outcome is that Tyler Boyd does end up leaving. Also worth noting that it is a non-exclusive franchise tag, so he can be negotiated with other teams, but still unlikely for him to be signed away.
Yeah, I believe that gives teams an option to offer him a contract, and then Bengals could match if they offer him a contract, or if he accepts that, he would leave, essentially.
Right. Yep.
We're moving down to the AFC South. Dalton Schultz re-signing a 3-year, $36 million deal with the Texans, so he will be staying. And that's kind of huge for the team. He was a big part of that receiving core for the team last year, one of C.J. Stroud's favorite targets out there. So keeping that together for the rookie, I guess, incoming sophomore, it's going to be great for the team just going forward.
Yeah, they showed a lot of chemistry last year, and he was pretty fantasy relevant. Not the most consistent, but definitely a good option there in kind of the mid range of tight ends. So we're going to continue to see that for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. And then going to the Indianapolis Colts, Mr. Michael Pittman also received a non-exclusive franchise tag to stay with the team for at least another year. I'm pretty confident they're going to end up working out something long-term with Michael Pittman. I don't think he really wants to leave. I feel like the Colts are a team that like to hold on to players more so than other teams, so I feel like he'll be there for the long haul. They just got to negotiate something at some point.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't really have too much to add. I think he's a good fit there. I will say for fantasy purposes that Michael Pittman was much worse in a small sample size with Anthony Richardson than he was with Gardner Minshew under center. So we'll have to see how Anthony Richardson's development can impact that and just kind of that dynamic. But I do expect, like you said, for him to return and be there long term.
Absolutely. And then moving over to the NFC East, Albert O signed a 1-year extension with the Eagles. I guess that is something that happened.
Whatever.
Something else that also happened, but I think this is a little bit more positive. We got Zach Ertz signing with the Washington Commanders. That's a reunion with Zach Ertz and Cliff Kingsbury, someone who got him very involved in that Cardinals offense before Zach Ertz went down with the torn ACL. But you know what they say, players do get more durable as they get older. So this is a great signing for Washington right here. But I think, Zach Ertz still has a little bit left in the tank. He showed that last year, so hopefully he does come back healthy off of this ACL tear. But what do you think about this one, Eric?
Do you think that he's an upgrade, a downgrade, or kind of neutral from Logan Thomas, who we just let go of?
Personally, I think anyone who actually plays the position of tight end is an upgrade over Logan Thomas, but I don't know. It's kind
Damn.
of yeah, it's kind of tough because he is getting older. I feel like 3 years ago this would have been really exciting, but now it's just kind of like I hope they bring in
Yeah.
someone else as well.
And I think they probably will. So just to clarify, when you say actually plays the position, do you mean like is healthy and on the field,
Uh,
like contributing to the team, or do you
I
mean that Logan Thomas is like bad at football?
I mean naturally a tight end. I mean I feel like Logan Thomas has had some good moments for the team.
Okay.
Obviously, like he's performed well, but I do like guys
Yeah.
who actually did play the position and not guys who converted to the position.
I see what you're saying. I see what
Yeah.
you're saying. Okay. Yeah, not super exciting, but I think he could be relevant there in Washington, at least for maybe a year. We'll see.
Yeah. So we're gonna scroll down, take a look to see if there's anybody left, and I do not.
Tampa.
Oh, Tampa Bay for sure. We got Mike Evans re-signing on a 2-year, $52 million deal. Bring him his money. Future Hall of Famer Mike Evans is returning with the team, and that is huge, especially if they decide to retain Baker Mayfield, someone who was not franchise tagged as well. So
Yeah.
that's going to be an interesting situation to watch.
So this is completely my own speculation. I don't have any sources to back this up necessarily, although I've seen people kind of reiterate the same idea that this re-signing of Mike Evans probably means they bring back Baker. You would think that if they were gonna, I don't know, let go of some of the veterans and kind of clean house, that Baker would also be on the way out and looking for a new team. But if they're gonna bring him back, it's tough because Mike Evans is such like a Buccaneer through and through that
Hmm.
maybe he's the one exception, and then they will clean house outside of that. But just a thought that it might mean that Baker stays with the team.
I absolutely agree with that sentiment for sure. So we're gonna have to keep an eye out for a Baker Mayfield deal at some point. And then taking a look down, the Los Angeles Rams re-signed Demarcus Robinson on a 1-year deal. That also happened,
I mean,
and
he contributed
he did.
near the end
He
of the
did.
season a little bit.
He
Not
did.
bad.
He boomed a little bit, but that's
Yeah.
actually going to round out all the free agent signings at the moment. Remember, guys, it's like 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, so stuff could happen by the time this video is out. But so far, that is all we've got at the moment. So we're going to move back over to the NFL free agents that are left at the moment. And we are going to start with the quarterback position. And at the top of this list, we've got Kirk Cousins, formerly of the Vikings, maybe still of the Vikings. It still remains to be seen. He's coming off a torn Achilles, which isn't great, but also not, the biggest condemnation, especially for his style of play and the type of quarterback that he is. So he does still have a lot of value, but where do you feel like Kirk Cousins could end up landing at? And what would be some favorable landing spots for Kirk Cousins?
Yeah. So the two top destinations that have been reported on so far are coming back to Minnesota, of course, and then Atlanta with the Falcons. Haven't heard much rumors really outside of that. Other teams that need quarterbacks, we're talking about like Denver, Las Vegas, obviously New England, but hopefully for their sake they do it through the draft. We'll see if they go another route. Giants, Pittsburgh, some other teams depending on whether they re-sign a quarterback or not. But I think we're talking about Atlanta versus Minnesota really as the only two reasonable landing spots for Kirk Cousins, both of which I think would be really good for fantasy purposes for Kirk. Obviously, if he stays in Minnesota, he's got the chemistry with everybody. He's still got a great wide receiver core. That offensive line has been good in pass blocking. So he would just continue to run it back as kind of that mid tier back end QB1 for fantasy purposes. I think people would get really excited if he goes to Atlanta, just because people like new things.
Hmm.
He would have Drake London, Kyle Pitts to throw to, potentially another receiver if they draft one inside that top 10. They also have a good offensive line, more so a good run blocking offensive line, but I think they're pretty decent in pass pro as well. I think he would do quite well for either team, but for fantasy purposes, I think a reunion with Minnesota would probably be the most favorable.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think at this point, Kirk Cousins, a team that's signing him is probably looking towards the future. So, I feel like whatever team signs him, they will probably bring in someone young as well. But, they'll obviously sit behind Kirk Cousins for a little bit. I feel like, at least that's how I feel. I don't know. It kind of stands to be seen how Kirk Cousins plays after coming off of this Achilles, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I think if he goes back to Minnesota, that's what they do. Minnesota seems like they're clearly looking for the quarterback of the future. Not that they're taking Kirk Cousins off their board. I think they like him and would like to have him back. But there's been a lot of talk about J.J. McCarthy, them trading up to get him, and other free agents on the market as well. Um, but Atlanta with Raheem Morris, who has the connection to Kirk Cousins going back to his days in Washington,
Hmm.
he's from that same Shanahan kind of coaching tree, or Shanahan McVay. I guess they're kind of all part of that same tree, um, where he's looking for that like drop back pocket passer type quarterback. And they've made it clear based on the way that they've talked about the quarterbacks they're interested in that Kirk really fits that mold versus a guy who we'll talk about here in a second, like Justin Fields, who's on the trade market. So if they were to sign him, I think that they wouldn't worry about necessarily a quarterback of the future. They'd be looking to compete now.
Yeah. Actually, do you want to talk about Justin Fields now since he's not really going to be a
On
free
the list,
agent on the
yeah,
list? Yeah.
yeah, I'm cool with that. Um, all the rumors that he's likely to be traded. The Bears at the 101 overall are probably going to take Caleb Williams. What are your thoughts in terms of his the market for him? What teams could be interested in him, and what landing spots would be beneficial?
I just think it's interesting first off that we haven't really seen an offer pop up yet. Because we do know that they want to probably move him. I think you got the opportunity to get Caleb Williams. You're going to take it. But when it comes to the teams, I feel like Atlanta is, sort of the best fit, but also not really an exciting fit for Justin Fields, especially in terms of like fantasy. I think it's good for Justin Fields, but in terms of like the weapons and stuff like that, they're going to
Right.
have to pretty much make it work off of pretty limited volume.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like any of these other teams that he could land with, I've seen Pittsburgh, and I've seen some Pittsburgh fans want him there, which I just think is hilarious because of all the dialogue about Lamar Jackson. You guys talk about him, call him a running back, but then you want Justin Fields. But
Yeah.
it's just it's weird for me. I feel like those are the best two teams that he could really land with, but I don't think any of them are really exciting for the people that are going to be around him. But what do you feel about Justin Fields?
No, I completely agree. I think that's going to be the case regardless of where he goes, is that, he can definitely improve as a passer, and he's going to need to if he wants to stick around in the league as a starter at least. Um, but it's most of these landing spots we're going to be talking about excitement for his fantasy purposes, not for the wide receivers and targets around him. Um, Obviously, Atlanta's on the table. You talked about Pittsburgh. I think that would be one of the better fits for him, going there with Mike Tomlin,
Hmm.
being with a good coaching staff. I think that would be positive for him. I think the Giants are potentially on the table, although at 6, like they could move up for a top tier quarterback. They could go somewhere else in free agency. And I think the Raiders are also in play here as well. Although Luke Getzey did go to the Raiders, and so I don't know that Justin Fields would want that reunion. I think he's
Yeah.
probably looking to stay away from him, but who knows? Those are kind of the top teams that I've heard in relation to Justin Fields.
Okay. So that being said, that's our little spiel on Mr. Fields. Maybe by the time this video comes out, we'll have a little bit more news, but most likely not. I feel like they're kind of taking their time with this one. Going to see what the most they can get is out of Justin Fields.
Yeah.
So more on that later. And then taking a look at the second quarterback on this list, we got Jacoby Brissett. I've seen a lot of Jacoby Brissett reunions with the Patriots. Again, this one isn't really a meter mover for me.
Yeah.
So it's
Great
not.
backup,
Yeah,
but yeah, he's not franchise changing.
yeah, I absolutely agree. He was good for the Commanders, as this kind of notes right here when Sam Howell went out. Kind of boosted his stock, but at the same time, it just really boosted his stock as a backup, not really as a guy who's going to start for a team.
Agreed.
Taking a look at Baker, somebody we were just talking about. We feel like they're going to bring him back just because of the I'm about to say Mike Thomas, good God. Mike Evans signing. But at the same time, he had a great year. We didn't see him get franchise tag, so that's big for him in terms of trying to get a more long-term deal. But anything else you got on Baker before we move on?
Not really. We talked about it already. I think Tampa Bay is the most likely landing spot. And I haven't heard a ton of rumors about like other landing spots for him. Have you gotten any whispers or anything like that?
I haven't heard anything except just people talking about him coming back to Tampa Bay because there isn't
Yeah.
much reason for them to get anybody else after last year's success, and he's only 29 years old. So,
Yeah. No,
uh,
I agree with that.
next up, we got one of my least favorite quarterbacks in the league. We got Ryan Tannehill. Um, I don't know where Ryan Tannehill is going to end up. I've heard some Ryan Tannehill to the Steelers as an option, which is just one
Because
of
of Arthur Smith, right?
yeah, I've heard some of that, which is just one of the most I don't know boring, I guess, free agent moves I've heard in a while. It would bring some stability to the team, I will say, as opposed to like some of the other guys they've had back there. But at the same time, it's just not really exciting. But what do you feel about Ryan Tannehill?
I don't care. I'm in the
Yeah,
same boat as you. I think that the Steelers have made the most noise about, or have been the most popular landing spot for him because of the Arthur Smith reunion. I'm curious to see how they handle Kenny Pickett this offseason. There's been plenty of public talk about not wanting him to be the starter, about bringing in competition because he's not good enough. I want to see how Kenny Pickett handles that talk and whether there's even a possibility that he could still start because Pittsburgh doesn't, at least from what we've seen so far, doesn't seem like they're going to be that aggressive in the QB market, and they're not in a position to draft one either.
yeah, and Kenny Pickett also kind of seems, at least off the stuff that we heard about last year about him like refusing to back up Mason Rudolph and stuff like that. I don't think he's gonna take it too well. But at the same time, you kind of need to play better if you want people to, play you. So
Yeah, sounds a little Mac Jonesy to me.
yeah, and we know what's gonna happen to that guy.
Yep.
Moving to the next, Russell Wilson. If you had told me this 2 years ago, I'd have been like, there's no way they cut a guy that they're paying that much money. And they are
It's
taking
crazy.
an $82 million cap hit just to get him out the building. So Russell Wilson is on the market. I guess teams that I feel like he could land with, if Minnesota doesn't retain Kirk Cousins, I feel like he's a guy that could bring in as sort of a bridge. Las Vegas, like you said, they're also looking for a quarterback. I could see them bringing him into the building. Uh, I know, but I haven't really heard any team interest in Russell Wilson yet, to be honest with you. Like, I haven't heard it. So,
You know, you know why?
why?
Because he's buns, dude. He's not good anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a bunch of people arguing that he still has it left in the tank because of some very specific metrics about completion percentage and how he performed at the end of the season and stuff like that. And I think that looking at those isn't necessarily the wrong way to do it. Uh, but the usage for Russell Wilson was very, very specific. I wish I had the tweet pulled up in front of me. If I find it, I'll put it up on the screen while I'm talking about it. But I want to say it was like Warren Sharp, somebody on Twitter posted that Russell Wilson had the most behind the line of scrimmage pass attempts of any quarterback over the last 5 years last season. He was also number one in attempts that are only 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, like 5 yards or less beyond the line of scrimmage. His usage in the intermediate portion of the field and the deep area of the field was almost non existent. Clearly, Sean Payton was like either trying to sabotage Russell Wilson by not allowing him to play the quarterback position to the fullest of his capabilities, or was trying to hide his deficiencies to an extreme amount. So I don't know. I just don't think Russell Wilson really still has it. And just even if it's not a talent issue, all of the other baggage surrounding Russell Wilson at this point in his persona, I don't know how many other teams are really going to want to bring that in.
yeah. At this point, he's not really a guy I want on my team. And also, people have to take note that he was known for like throwing the deep ball, stuff like that. But a lot of that was done off of plays where things broke down. He had to improvise a little bit. He had to use his legs, and that is something that you can noticeably see has taken sort of a step down. So losing that ability to do that and extend those plays is probably why the deep ball and more intermediate passes have kind of, faltered a little bit for Russell Wilson. So going forward, I'm going to be interested to see. I feel like this article is alluding to, he's going to end up being a backup somewhere, just a bridge quarterback. I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be a full-fledged starter anymore, but it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how that ends up, I guess playing out. But it's kind of sad at the same time.
Yeah. I don't have too much to add. It's definitely sad for a
Yeah.
guy that was, I mean, legitimately considered like a top five quarterback in the league 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah, now he's
And
bottom of
look
the
how far
barrel.
he's fallen.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Wild.
Moving to the next quarterback we got here, one of my favorite quarterbacks, Mr. Jameis Winston. I have no
Bro,
idea where Jameis is going to end up at.
read this first line.
His hilarious insubordination. Yeah, bro. That last play is one of my favorite things that happened last season. It's also
So
just
good.
insanity at the same time. But Jameis, it's just Jameis being Jameis at the end of the day, really. I'm not really shocked. So,
Yeah.
what do you feel about Jameis? Do you think he could end up being a starter somewhere? I think he's just going to end up being a backup for the most part again. I know he's looking to
Yeah.
start somewhere, though, but I don't see how realistic
Well,
that is.
of course he is. Of course
Yeah.
he is. You got to be confident when you're Jameis Winston. No, man. I mean, I also love the entertainment factor with Jameis Winston, but I don't anticipate him being a starter anywhere. He is a locker room guy. I'm
Yeah.
sure all of his teammates are gonna love him wherever he goes. So I'm happy to see how his NFL journey continues, but I don't know that he's going to be relevant to a team's success necessarily or your fantasy success by any means.
I would love to see him end up in Pittsburgh with Arthur Smith. That would be hilarious. But time stands to be seen. I feel like anywhere Jameis lands, like you said, he's an entertainer. The people are gonna love him. The team's gonna love him. The
Yeah.
fans are probably gonna love him as well. But fantasy relevance, not too sure. Taking a look at Gardner Minshew, this is somebody who actually could get a starting spot in the NFL somewhere as kind of like a bridge quarterback. Definitely one of the highest tier backups we've got in the league. I've seen some Gardner Minshew to the Denver Broncos, which I feel like
Oh,
would
really?
kind of be a good spot. Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that. But other than that, I haven't really seen a whole lot for Gardner Minshew.
Yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot of talk either. It's also quite possible that he returns back to the Colts.
Yeah.
Anthony Richardson, fingers crossed, he doesn't continue to deal with these injury issues. And I'm not really one of the subscribers to the camp that running quarterbacks are substantially more injury prone than pocket passers. I think quarterbacks just get hurt. That's what happens.
Hmm.
But he didn't really slide a ton, and that can definitely contribute to some injuries. So if he continues that trend of not really sliding, they're probably going to need a competent backup there in Indianapolis. So I would kind of hope that they bring him back. But to your point, I also haven't heard too many rumors of anywhere else.
Absolutely. Next up, we got Tyrod Taylor, who, again, kind of like other guys, we don't really know where he's going to land. I haven't heard a lot of buzz. He's going to probably be a backup wherever it is he goes. One of the higher tier backups, though, like they say here, the perfect backup. But other than that, I don't really have too much on Tyrod here.
Neither do I, but I think our next position group here is going to be quite a bit more exciting. Are you ready to talk about some running backs?
Absolutely. Let's get into it. And kicking off the list, we've got Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, he did not get franchise tagged. We kind of expected that to happen after, last year's sort of debacle. So he is officially hitting the free agent market. I don't believe he's going to end back up in New York. Because at this point, if they were going to re-sign him, they kind of would have. It's kind of, Occam's razor on that one. But when we're taking a look at Saquon and possible landing spots, I've seen three main spots a lot. I've seen Dallas, I've seen Houston, and I've seen Baltimore. But what do you feel
Yeah.
about Saquon and his possible landing spots?
So for Saquon himself, just to talk about what he still has left in the tank, because obviously last season wasn't his best, and I think a lot of people are kind of bringing up the idea that he's beginning to get to that point where he's over the cliff. I think he is kind of on the downward trend, but he's definitely not over the cliff in my opinion. Looking at some of his efficiency metrics compared to other running backs last year, he was kind of right in the middle of the pack to like slightly above average in a lot of those categories. But what he brings as a receiver out of the backfield, I think, is also really important. So he's still got stuff left to contribute to NFL teams. I agree with you. Those three teams that you mentioned, Baltimore, Houston, and Dallas, are the ones that I've heard the most. The guy that we're going to talk about next, I think, is more likely to end up in Baltimore. So Dallas, Houston, some other teams that need running back like Cleveland, Green Bay, the Chargers. I've also heard a little bit
Hmm.
of chatter there with Saquon. Um, Tough to really project where he's going to end up, but it's going to be an exciting landing spot for sure. from a fantasy perspective, do you think that a new landing spot is going to be beneficial for him?
Yes, I do. I think the Giants' offensive line was left a lot to be desired these past
Atrocious.
few years, and Saquon's kind of made the most out of what he could. But I think if he landed somewhere that one, prioritizes running the ball, and two has the offensive line to go along with it, someone like the Chargers, like you said, who kind of expressed early on interest. Jim Harbaugh definitely said that as soon as he got with the team that he's looking for a guy like Saquon. I feel like that would be a match made in heaven for Saquon Barkley to kind of have, a sort of career resurgence. I don't think he's going to be the same player, obviously, as when he came into the league. He's, taken some knocks since then, but I think he could still be a very good fantasy asset in terms of just what he can do. But yeah, I think anywhere is kind of better than the Giants out of these teams that we've listed, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that offensive line was doing him no favors. So I completely agree with you.
Yep. And then moving to the next player, like you alluded to, Derrick Henry, someone that we have seen very much linked to the Ravens as soon as we knew he was going to hit the free agency market. But it's just going to be interesting to see what does end up happening with Derrick Henry. His trajectory has been interesting, but at the same time, we're talking similar things that we talked with Saquon, where his offensive line was absolutely putrid, but he was a guy who was getting like 25, 30 touches a game. So, in fantasy, we believe volume's king. But if it's volume behind a line like that, you kind of get what you got last season, which is, a running back who's getting older, who just can't run everybody over. So
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting to see if he lands with a team like the Ravens that do have a competent O-line who can get it done and see what he can do with that volume then.
Yeah, if he can go somewhere that gives him more leeway in terms of yards before contact,
Yeah.
he's still a monster. Like he's still going to be so good. It's just the fact that he was getting hit behind the line of scrimmage on almost every play there in Tennessee. You mentioned Baltimore, obviously the team most closely connected with him. A team that's hasn't really been mentioned in terms of like needing a running back because of who they have on the team, but one that I heard mentioned in connection with him early on in the free agency process, Buffalo. Um,
Hmm.
Seems kind of crazy. They already have James Cook, a very different type of running back, but I could see that tandem working out quite well for them if they were to go kind of chasing a big name running back like Derrick Henry. What are your thoughts on that landing spot?
I feel like that would be cool. I feel like that would fit a lot of needs for Buffalo. Something that they've been kind of looking for the last few years is a guy who can get it done in between the tackles, especially on the goal line and in the red zone. And if anybody
Yeah.
is that, it's Derrick Henry for sure.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something they're still not confident with using James Cook on. Like they still gave a lot of those touches to Latavius Murray. I believe Damian Harris was hurt most of last season or all
Yeah.
of last season, so they didn't even really get a chance to use him there like they had signed him
hmm
for. So I think this would be big for that team as well.
Yeah. So we'll have to see. But those are the two teams that I've heard most closely connected to the Yeti.
Absolutely.
Um, you want to go to Josh Jacobs? I'm actually pretty excited about Josh Jacobs.
I'm excited about Josh Jacobs, but he's a guy that I forgot was going to be a free agent because I haven't really heard anybody talk about him yet. What do you feel about Josh Jacobs? Because obviously, I think he's still got a lot left in the tank,
For
but
sure.
I don't know what the interest is in Josh Jacobs in terms of like what other teams are looking for.
Yeah, so in terms of like rumors that we've
Hmm.
heard about people, teams connected with him, I haven't heard a ton. The one that I heard most recently this morning actually was with Chicago, like kind of a mutual interest between the two. Questionable source that I saw it from, so I don't want to act like that's like a big time thing. But I did see Chicago. I think there's a decent chance that he actually returns to the Raiders now that there's been a change in coaching staff and that Antonio Pierce has returned. I think their
Yeah.
relationship is definitely better than it was with the previous staff. So I don't think that's out of the question either. But I do think that Josh Jacobs is going to want to go somewhere and compete, be part of a successful winning team. And I think there's still a lot of question marks on the table with that Raiders team, kind of lacking a quarterback right now, whether that's even possible.
I absolutely agree. I'm taking a look now because I'm just wondering if Josh Jacobs has scored a receiving touchdown yet. Um, and I kind of want to say he has not, but let's see. Receiving. Nope. Still no career receiving touchdowns.
That's wild.
Yeah.
What a wild stat. For a guy as productive as he is, that's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean that's not indicative of anything. I just think it's a crazy stat. So I just wanted to check. I
Yeah.
check on it every year and it's insane that it continues like this. But with that being said, we're gonna move forward to Tony Pollard, someone else who was disappointing last season, I feel like, to say the least. We thought he was going to do a little bit more, but at the same time, this was our first time seeing him as a workhorse running back, and I don't think he was really built to withstand that kind of workload, and, the team kind of realized that as well. His playing time definitely came down as the season went along. His touches and just percentage on the field decreased as the weeks went on, but I feel like he's a candidate to stay in Dallas and they bring in another running back with him. So
Yeah.
I don't think he's the most exciting free agent out there because I feel like that's what's going to happen. But what do you feel about Tony Pollard here?
No, I'm in lockstep. I agree with you that that's the most likely outcome. I do want to bring up that he was coming off of, breaking his leg
Yes.
prior to last season. He's even mentioned that that was kind of something that held him back, and he didn't feel like he was fully up to speed until week 11. I'm not sure if I'm not sure how honest he's being with that, or if he just knows that his PFF grade after week 11 was a lot higher than prior to that and wanted to make it seem like that was what was holding him back. Um, so that's left to be seen whether he's still kind of that explosive back that we saw from 2022 and before, or if he's more so what we saw from him last year. But I absolutely agree that he's going to be better suited in a complementary role and probably staying in Dallas.
Absolutely. So I've heard, or at least very early on, I've seen some Tony Pollard to Washington, possibly. I don't think that's quite going to happen. Like I said, I feel like him staying in Dallas is probably the most likely outcome there. But that's the only other
But
team
another
I've really
guy,
seen linked. But yeah.
another guy linked to Washington, if you want to move on to the next.
Yep. We got DeAndre Swift, who. Okay. DeAndre Swift is coming off the best season of his career. He got 1,000 yards rushing. He stayed healthy for pretty much the entire season. I think the entirety of the season he was healthy. Him landing in Washington would be a thing that could happen. Am I excited about that? As you guys don't know, if this is your first time watching the channel, me and Eric are both Commanders fans. I got a big feeling that the second he lands in Washington is the second that he does start getting injured again. I just feel like that's kind of our luck. I feel like that's just what's going to happen. But I don't know. It's not really an exciting signing, but it would be. I see from a team standpoint how it could be something that is valuable to the team. He's a guy who can catch the ball out the backfield. He could be paired up with Brian Robinson, so he wouldn't have to be the guy in between the tackles. Brian Robinson Jr. could handle a lot of that workload, and he could get back to more of what he was in Detroit in terms of a guy who can run between the tackles and bring some of those more explosive plays, but also catch the ball as well. But what do you feel about DeAndre Swift and his possible landing spots?
Yeah, from the positive end of the spectrum, I think we both agree that he's still a very talented running back.
Yes, and he's only
He's still
25.
exactly. That was the next point I was going to bring up. He's still fairly young. And yeah, in tandem with Brian Robinson, if that's where he were to end up, I think that would be a good pairing. He's the more explosive. He's the better pass catching back. He can kind of be what Washington was trying to deploy Antonio Gibson as, and hopefully be better suited for that role, where Brian Robinson can kind of be the two down grinder. But yeah, just from like a fandom perspective, I'd be so nervous that he just doesn't really play. He'd be injured the whole time. And also, I don't know how much of it to blame on DeAndre Swift himself or how much of it was just the Eagles' kind of demise at the back end of the season, but he definitely slowed down quite a
Yes.
bit during the back third of last year after getting off to a hot start. So that's all I really got for DeAndre. I haven't really heard many other teams in conjunction with him either. Have you heard any other rumors, or is he really the only one?
That's the only one that I've heard, and then just him re-signing with the Eagles is all I've really heard. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And we're going to move to the next one. We got Mr. Austin Eckler, the 29-year-old, but one of the most complete backs, as this is saying, in the NFL. In terms of where we think he's going to land, I feel like any team that's in need of a good receiving running back or a great receiving running back, honestly, could use Austin Eckler. I've seen some whispers of Austin Eckler to the Chiefs, which would be, a
Mm-hmm.
great landing spot for him. But this is something me and Eric kind of talked about before the show, where if they could just retain Jerick McKinnon to do something similar, they may just keep going that route and stay cheaper because it would really depend on what the price tag of Austin Eckler is at this point in his career. But what do you think
Yeah.
about Austin Eckler in any possible landing spots?
Yeah, this is one where I think maybe he is closer to kind of over the hill. I'm not sure how much athletically he has left to contribute. I think he's still fundamentally sound and can definitely contribute as a receiver out of the backfield, but the explosiveness seems to kind of be gone. Um, so I don't know if he's going to have a ton of interest. I don't expect him to return to LA. Actually,
It's a possibility, but it's a whole new staff. They may be looking to move on to some new
yeah,
stuff, I feel like.
draft Blake Corum with Jim Harbaugh there.
Oh my gosh, bro. Probably, honestly.
I've heard little bits and pieces here and there about him kind of being linked to Houston, but nothing substantial, nothing from good sources. So I don't know. This one it might kind of be the end of an era for Austin Eckler, which is sad to say because it's been so cool to see this undrafted guy kind of come out of nowhere and rise to prominence. But yeah, it might be near the end of the line for him.
I absolutely agree. So it's going to stand to be seen where Eck ends up at, but, wishing him the best, and hopefully he does get a good landing spot somewhere cool. Moving to the next, we've got J.K. Dobbins, who one of the more sad injuries of last year tore his Achilles, especially after that weird sort of him sitting out, waiting to get, an extension, stuff like that. Unfortunately, now that extension is probably going to come a lot cheaper than it was going to before. So, like I said, this one is kind
If
of
at
sad to
all.
see, yeah, if at all. They're saying right here he still has top 10 back potential if he can stay healthy. I'm not too sure who wrote this article, but I don't really agree with that sentiment. As I can see from Eric's face, he doesn't really agree with that also. Uh, but what do you think about J.K. Dobbins and any type of, I guess, interest for J.K. Dobbins? I think, he's still young. That is a plus he's got on his side at 25, but coming
Yeah.
off an Achilles for running backs, we haven't seen the best track record.
Yeah, the only guy that we've really seen return and have any do anything truly positive and substantial is like Deonta Foreman, and that was
Hmm.
like 4 years removed
Yeah.
from the Achilles tear. It was really sad to see. J.K. Dobbins, I think, was primed to really have a true breakout season last year, and was doing great in that Week 1 game prior to the injury. But yeah, running backs with a torn Achilles have a terrible track record. I don't know that I think the most likely option, if he's going to be under contract on a team, is probably for him to return to Baltimore. But I think he might just sit out in free agency for a while before anybody has interested in him. If other running back injuries happen first, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's a guy, like you said, a team brings in after they're like, all right, we need somebody because everybody's kind of, banged up right now.
Yeah.
And then last on the running backs list, we've got Devin Singletary, who is a guy. He did play pretty well
See,
last
don't do
year as
that to
well.
him.
He played pretty well last
Don't
year, I will say.
don't do that to him.
He's a guy.
I don't even think he should be ranked 8th on this list. I think he should be higher. Like I'm not saying he's elite. I'm not saying he's a top tier runner in the league. I think he was in a good situation in Houston that he
Hmm.
took advantage of. But he's always been fairly efficient. I think he's a good running back.
He has been pretty efficient, I will say. This is a lot of bias coming from me. I've been burned by Devin Singletary on some fantasy teams, but he is a guy who he has performed. And like this says, the Texans offense played well when they moved him to the starting spot. So there's a possibility they do just bring him back in if he was that productive for them. So, like I said, I don't really see a whole lot of free agent interest in Devin Singletary, but like you said, there are a
Yes.
lot of teams that could use a guy like Devin Singletary.
Yeah, I honestly hope he returns to Houston. And the fact that Houston is being labeled as this like running back landing spot makes me upset a little bit because I think Devin had a great tenure there, and was obviously better than what Damian Pierce was able to provide this year. And from a fantasy perspective, was really impressive down the stretch and helped
Yeah.
win people some fantasy championships. So I think him staying there would be the most beneficial for us as the fantasy community. And I think it's probably the most likely outcome. I just don't know, like if Houston does bring in another running back, whether it be Saquon or an Eckler or something along those lines. Like, how much better is that than what they're getting from Devin Singletary now? Like, Saquon is better, yes, but like, by how much? Is it worth the money to them?
That is true. Like, how much of a bump up would it give the team itself?
Yeah,
It's a good question. Like you said, and like I said, he did play extremely well down the stretch, and I do like to kind of look at like those types of runs going into the next season because that would just mean it's a little bit more of the same, and they would
right.
keep that same level of efficiency. So, like you said, I feel like he could still be good for this team to stay.
Yeah, agreed.
And then we're moving to the wide receiver spot. And the first guy up here on the list, Calvin Ridley, who had one of the most confusing 1,000-yard seasons we've seen out of receiver in recent memory. He
Yeah.
did, show that he was able to get open, especially against, it was man that he was able to get open against the most, right? It was man that he
He
did really
was
well against.
he was actually more successful
It
against
was
zone.
zone.
We so
It was
the two
Christian Kirk that was better against man. I was trying to remember who it was because they flip flop back and forth with who was effective.
Yeah, we're looking at reception perception from Matt Harmon right now because he just put out a few different receiver profiles for some of the guys that are on this free agency list. Calvin Ridley being one. Um, in terms of his success rate by route, he was green in like every category except for curls. So from a film perspective, he was successful, and he had a high success rate against both man, zone, and press. Um, so in terms of Matt Harmon's kind of film review of him last year, he was pretty good. From a fantasy perspective, it was definitely inconsistent and frustrating, but I mean, the Jaguars in general were pretty inconsistent and frustrating. Trevor Lawrence's play was kind of up and down, so hard to really pinpoint where the cause and effect kind of comes from there.
Yeah, agreed. In terms of landing spots, I've seen Carolina. Obviously, Carolina's in big need of wide receiver help over there, so I feel like any free agent wide receiver, you're probably going to see Carolina on the list. But
Yeah.
just pretty much every team in the NFL needs good wide receivers, so this really
Yep.
could be anywhere for the most part. But what do you feel about Calvin Ridley and some landing spots?
I've also seen him linked to New England a few times.
Okay.
I think we can say not definitively, none of this is guaranteed or for sure, but I think we can say with some pretty good confidence that he's not going to be returning to Jacksonville.
Yeah.
If they were to retain him, then Jacksonville I think would have to send a second round pick to Atlanta. That was
Yep.
part of the deal. And if they trade him, do they not owe anything, or does that downgrade to a third? I forget what the stipulation is.
I want to say it was second round pick or nothing, but I don't remember
Okay.
off the top of my head.
Either way, they benefit more from letting him go, assuming that they don't think that he's like a centerpiece to that offense. But yeah, I've heard Carolina, I've heard New England. I tend to be of the belief that Carolina's going to do most of their wide receiver additions through the draft. Um,
Yeah.
I could absolutely see them bringing in a vet of some kind, but I don't know that they're going to break the bank with one of these top end free agent additions. I could see it being someone kind of lower on the list here.
No, I 100% agree with that because it's not like Carolina's really in win now mode. So yeah, I think like you said, building the team up through the draft and maybe some lower free agents probably the best way to go there.
Yeah.
Next up on the wide receiver list, we got Marquise Brown, 27-year-old wide receiver. How do you feel about Marquise Brown? Because I haven't heard a whole lot of, I guess, ties to other teams, but I do think, Marquise Brown still does have a lot left in the tank and a lot that was underutilized in Arizona.
Yeah, so I haven't heard a ton of speculation or rumors about teams connected to him either. One that I've heard a little bit, and it's really just a team that's kind of tied to any speed demon deep threat, is Kansas City.
Mm,
Um, I think he would at least be an upgrade over MVS.
yeah.
I do like Marquise Brown. I think Marquise Brown is a good player, underrated, hasn't really performed up to what I think he's capable of, or at least he hasn't been put in the position to succeed to the fullest of his capabilities. A lot of that has also been due to injury. He hasn't been able to stay healthy for a lot of his career. But I do see him as a top tier guy in this free agency class, and I think he could be a contributor to a team like that that's looking for somebody to kind of stretch defenses.
I absolutely agree. So I really don't have too much more on Marquise Brown. Kind of waiting to hear more about team interest in him. But like you said, still a good player. Still a lot left to value. A lot of value left to a team that could use a player like him. So Marquise Brown, that's why he's second on this list. And then next we got big game Gabe Davis. Uh, when it comes to, he's only 25 years old. And when it comes to teams I've seen him tied to, I've seen a little bit of Cleveland in terms of a tie, which I feel like would be a good spot for him. But at the same time, Gabe Davis in terms of his game, I don't think either of us are really huge fans of Gabe Davis. He's not a great separator. He's not good at getting open, but he is good at having big games every once in a while. That's something that you can count on every single season. So it's tough. I feel like he's somebody that teams could value just in terms of what he can get done on the field in the games that he is hitting. But the problem is he just doesn't hit too often. So it's tough. I've seen Cleveland, but have you heard anything about Gabe Davis?
Not really. I've heard the fantasy community trying to hype him up and say, "Imagine Gabe Davis in a high volume passing offense," and it's like, you mean like the one that he just left?
Yeah.
Like, you mean Buffalo? I don't. He's going to continue to be boom bust wherever he goes because, like you said, he's not a good separator. He's not really good in the short and intermediate area of the field. So he's not going to bring you consistency because that's where your floor comes from. He'll bring you big games because he's a decent deep threat. He's good in contested catch situations. And then from an NFL perspective, he's also a good blocker on the edge and can contribute in the running game, which I think is going to, be a big reason why he gets signed somewhere. But from a fantasy perspective, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I guess we're gonna have to wait for more on Gabe Davis as well. But moving on to the next player, we got Curtis Samuel, formerly of the Washington Commanders. In terms of landing spots for Curtis, I haven't heard a lot of interest, but at the same time, I feel like he is a guy who can get things done on a lot of spots of the field. So I think he's a big candidate to return to Washington, to be honest. But I don't know. What do you feel about Curtis Samuel and where he could land at? He's someone that people have kind of like in recent years put in sort of like a Debo Samuel type of, I guess, role on the team. But I don't
Yeah.
know.
So I haven't heard this from anywhere, but just a thought because I know that his relationship with DJ Moore is a really good one. Could see him going to Chicago.
Mm.
They're looking to make additions in the wide receiver room. They're going to be bringing in probably Caleb Williams, so I'm sure he would want to go play there with a guy like that. But that's just kind of my own speculation there.
Yeah, so not too much on Curtis. Moving on to the next, we got Darnell Mooney, who had a good season, like this is saying 2 years ago. Last year, kind of disappeared. Year before, also disappeared. So, in terms of career trajectory, I'm not really sure what's going on with Darnell Mooney. In terms of league interest, I'm really not sure as well. So, I don't know. I don't really have too much here on this one.
Yeah, we can kind of speed through the rest of this list. The Darnell Mooney, I have another guy that I've heard kind of linked to Kansas City for that kind of deep threat ability. But that's all I got there. KJ Osborne, we don't like him. I don't
Yeah.
think that he's going to be super valuable or have that much of a market for many other teams. He's another guy that's physical, decent blocker, can contribute in the run game, but from a fantasy perspective, basically irrelevant. You agree?
Absolutely. We
Uh,
got Odell Beckham. Odell
yeah.
Beckham. What you got for Odell?
He's old. He's 31. I mean, like if you pick and choose certain plays from last year, he had some decent highlights. He's still a good route runner. I think he can be a good mentor for young wide receivers. Uh, but I don't know that he's really going to be a consistent contributor anywhere either.
Yeah, I agree. Not too much on Odell Beckham. Old Dell Beckham, as I like to call him sometimes.
Odell Beckham.
So we're moving on to Tyler Boyd, somebody we mentioned earlier in the video. I feel like there is interest in Tyler Boyd. I also feel like Tyler Boyd's a guy that we put a lot of stock into and hasn't really performed a lot on that stock. But at the same time, when you bring in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, it's very easy to get overshadowed and kind of be the
Yeah.
three guy in that option. So I think if he goes to a team where he is at least the number two, he could shine a little bit more. But again, in terms of landing spots, I haven't really heard a ton. Obviously, we're gonna keep saying teams like the Chiefs or the Panthers, teams that just desperately need wide receivers. But I feel like the Panthers will be a good spot for him, even a spot where he could end up being the number one.
Agreed. That's what I was going to point to, is depending on Adam Thielen's status, and obviously he's aging out at this point. Tyler Boyd is kind of in that similar big slot mold, so I could see him there in Carolina, even if he's just kind of in that same mentor position to some rookies that they bring in as well.
Absolutely. And moving forward, we got the ghost of Michael Thomas. Um, yeah,
Haven't seen him be good since 2019. Well, okay, so
he's
was it
been
this season?
he's had some games every here and there because it was I
Yeah,
think this season, maybe even the season prior, that he had like a few good games before he got hurt, before he had that ankle
first
injury.
like 3 or 4 games or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, but availability is the best ability, and he does not have that ability.
Yeah, so that's all we got on Michael Thomas there. And then the tight ends is going to be pretty short. We've only got two of them on here. So first off, we got Hunter Henry. He did play pretty well during his time with the Patriots. He did kind of emerge as the tight end one out there. How much that really means, I don't know. Um, Going forward and teams that could use Hunter Henry, I guess teams that need a tight end, we got like Carolina, they're in pretty good need of a tight end. Hayden Hurst, dealt with injury last year, got hurt as well. Cincinnati, I don't even know who the tight end is there right now. Drew Sample, is that who's starting at tight end for them right now?
I think so.
I feel
I think
like
so.
Hunter Henry would be a pretty decent upgrade over Drew Sample. Denver in need of a tight end as well. Uh, Honestly, I don't really have a whole lot on Hunter Henry here. He is 29 years old, so he's starting to get older. So it's tough to really say there's a team out there that's going to very much value a Hunter Henry right now. But do you have anything on him before we move on?
I, I think he's still talented. I think he still has a fair amount left to contribute from an NFL perspective. For fantasy though, like obviously you don't love fantasy options in New England.
Yeah.
They do quite poorly, but they feature the tight end quite a bit. So if he goes to another team where tight end is prominently featured in the offense, I think he could have some fantasy relevance. But I don't know that his situation necessarily improves by that much going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Another guy that I want to bring up that's not on the list before we get to Noah Fant, Jonnu Smith was
Mm.
recently, I think he visited with the Dolphins. Um, Nothing official yet, no contract signing, but he went there, he visited. And the Dolphins are a team that I feel like is somewhat in need of a tight end.
You don't think
Who's
Durham
their
Smythe's
start?
going to get it done?
I was gonna say
Yeah.
Durham Smythe is great, bro. Durham Smythe is a great blocker. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that Jonnu Smith could provide something to that team that they don't currently have, a little bit more athleticism, and receiving ability at that tight end spot for them. So I think that would actually be a pretty decent fit and one that could be fairly exciting for fantasy, maybe.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a landing spot in Miami would be good, and I think it would just give them another good weapon to have in terms of down the field. Besides just throwing the ball every play to Tyreek Hill, it would loosen up the field as well for Jalen Waddle too. So I think that would just be an all around positive for that team.
Yeah,
And
completely agree.
moving to the last tight end we've got on this list, we got Noah Fant, who, as this article is alluding to, tight ends develop, on a slower timeline for the most part, usually. And Noah Fant has definitely been on that trajectory. During his days with the Broncos, didn't really get a whole lot done until towards the end of his tenure there. And things in Seattle haven't been great, but they have been at least good. And he's only 26 years old, so at this point in his career, I feel like there are a lot of teams that could be in need of a Noah Fant, just a young guy who is starting to develop at that position. I've seen some Noah Fant to Washington in terms of just
Hmm.
like people. I don't know if it's been a rumor, but at least people have been trying to tie those two together, saying that would be a good pairing, and I also agree with that. But what do you feel
Yeah.
about Noah Fant?
I like Noah Fant a lot, actually. I know that he's kind of the guy. He's the last guy on our entire list, the last guy in the video. But he's somebody that I'd be pretty excited about joining a new team.
Hmm.
Um, I could, it takes a lot of factors and ifs to kind of go right for this to happen. But I could see him kind of following a similar career trajectory to like an Evan Ingram, where he was thought of as an afterthought. Came in as like a super athletic, highly thought of prospect, kind of tanked and went into obscurity, but
Hmm.
could find himself back in relevance because I think he is talented. He still has the athleticism. He just needs to be featured. And, getting that opportunity is no easy feat, no easy task to accomplish. But some teams where I think he could really thrive, I think the Chargers would be a great fit for him, pairing him with Justin Herbert. I think Miami is also a decent fit. Carolina would probably mean a decent amount of volume, but I don't know. what the upside there would look like. And then obviously Cincinnati, there would be a lot of mouths to feed, but pairing him with Joe Burrow would be amazing.
Absolutely agree. But with that being said, that is going to round out our list. I know it was a long one, guys, but it was a fun one, honestly. We had a good time doing this one. So if you guys had a good time, you liked any of our takes, or you disagree with anything, sound off in the comments down below. Let us know what you think. And about some of these guys' landing spots, where do you think they're going to end up? Again, apologize if things change by the time this video comes out. This is, Thursday morning. But at the same time, we're glad that you guys were here. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. That way you know when we drop all of our latest videos. And hit that like button too. It's absolutely free, and it's the best way to get our stuff out there in the YouTube algorithm. But before we get out of here, Eric, you got anything else for the people?
Yeah, my cat says bye, apparently. And also, if you guys could do us a favor and go check those links down in the description below. We have a link to our Discord. Great community over there. People talking in there every single day, whether it be Dynasty Talk, talking about trades, talking about startups, giving all sorts of advice to each other. That's been great. If you're looking to join a new startup, or even just have a conversation about the free agency, anything that we're talking about in this video, feel free to jump in there, be part of our community. That would be great. And then also the other links to our partners, whether it be Do Numbers, if you're looking for some cool apparel, hoodies, t-shirts, hats, any sort of merch. And also CMG, Choice Music Group, if you're interested in some really cool music over there. So go check those out. But yeah, I think that's all I got. So if you guys have stuck with us all the way until the end, as always, we love you. And we will catch you in the next video. Peace.
Peace.